Good evening, Monsieur. I'm very excited this evening to have Father Richard Leonard back to St. Bede again. Today he has prepared a new topic that is very relevant to this Jubilee year that Pope Francis has proclaimed, and I'm excited all of us to hear what Father has to say. Father Richard is a Jesuit priest, author, educator, critic, and one of the most popular speakers at Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, as you know. He has been a visiting professor at Gregorian University in Rome and a visiting scholar at our very own UCLA. He was born, raised, and officially lived in Australia, although in many ways he belongs to the world through his travel, lecture, videos, and books. With an undergraduate degree in arts, education, and theology, a master's in systematic theology, and a PhD in cinema studies, he keeps our attention and engages us visually, challenges us, our intellect, to deepen our love and trust in God. Father Richard has wide and varied interests. He is director of the Australian Catholic Film Office. He's a film critic and consults with the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference on Media Committee. As an author of 9 books, he used words and thoughts that calls us to be a better individual, more committed to Catholic faith, and to bring us closer to God. Besides sharing our love for God through our priesthood, Father Richard and I share a love of films and movies. Please join me now in giving Father Richard a very big welcome to St. Bede.
Boy, I hope you're clapping by the end, but let's see how we go. Padre Antonio, it's always a great joy to return to this community. I can honestly say that it feels like a homecoming after the 2 previous years we've had together, where we were over many days. And then when I was approached by your parish leadership team again, do you have another mission? And I said, well, actually, I don't. And they said, well, we want something. We need something. And so here I am tonight to give you a talk you haven't heard before. I'm actually going to base this talk on 3 different books. One that I think I had when I was with you last time, called Why Bother Praying? And the last chapter of that is all about mission, that our prayer is about sending us out on mission. The second is a book that came out last year, since I've seen you last year, What Are We Doing on Earth for Christ's Sake? As you know, I love snazzy titles. I like good titles with a bit of punch. You have to read the introduction. You like this book? Oh, thank God. Thank God somebody does, other than my mother. And you're going to hear about her later. You'll have to read the introduction to the book to find out why I chose that title. It comes out of a very specific and wonderful story on a plane. And then finally, this year, I've already published a little book called What Are We Hoping For? Reflections on Lent and Easter. So this is a book to help guide us all through our time of Lent and Easter, all the way up to including Corpus Christi and Trinity Sunday. So it's based on those 3 books. What I'd like to do tonight is actually focus on Lent within the year of mercy. At the beginning of Lent, Pope Francis at the Vatican said this, and I quote, "Especially this Lent, I'm hoping we will discover there is no one, not a single place beyond the grace of God's mercy and compassion. No one. We just need the eyes to see it and the heart to receive it. And as a result of this Lenten journey, may we by Easter recommit to follow Christ every day in the real world so that our lives may be Christ's message of mercy." Isn't that terrific? That our lives might be Christ's message of mercy. So I'm going to base this entire talk on where we're going to get to at the end of Lent, not looking at the specifics of Lent, but the whole point is, as the Holy Father says, to be commissioned by the Lord to go out and to proclaim the good news. When the Church talks about its mission into the real world, it says there are 3 elements to it. There's a mission of witness, inculturation, and liberation. Not having a happy time. Put on that, that feels a bit better. So it's a witness of word and example, of inculturation and of liberation. I want to explore each of these with you tonight. Witness by word and example. You know, the Reverend Dr. Billy Graham once famously said, "Going to church no more makes you a Christian than living in a garage would make you a car." Now, I think Billy Graham and I both think that going to church matters. We both probably do a fair bit of it. I go every day. I go to Mass every day, and I'm very happy to do so. But it isn't what going to church that makes us Christian. Do you know there are some Christians and indeed some Catholics who come to Mass, and in fact, by the way they behave, they've wasted their time. Mass is not magic. Sacraments are not there to wave a little wand over bad people that they might all, in a single instant, be better. It's celebrating that Christ's love and grace can convert us back to the gospel that we might live it from Monday to Saturday. So our witness in the world actually designates whether even our practice of the faith is having a constant impact on our lives. And witness has two component parts: what we say and what we do. Do you know, when St. Francis Xavier, arguably the Church's greatest missionary, left Rome and went to Portugal, on to India, and then the so-called Far East, St. Ignatius Loyola, our founder, gave him a fantastic piece of advice. He said, "Francis, wherever you go, learn the language." In Australia and the United States, there is now a post-Christian, somewhat post-modern language spoken this day, especially with our young people. And if we want to speak to them about mercy and compassion, justice and love that comes from the gospel, we're going to have to learn how to speak to them in a way that they can hear. You see, communication has two parts: what I say and what's heard. Sometimes we think we just have to say the same old thing, but if no one's listening, then it's all fallen down. And Pope Francis has said in this year of mercy that if ever our witness by word is anything, then it has to be always characterized by compassion and mercy, that's the cornerstone of the gospel. This is absolutely true. It's just that we've covered it up for probably centuries. I'm not sure about you, but I'm not sure every homily I've ever heard, every bit of advice I ever got in confession, and every time I went on any school or parish retreat, I always thought it was merciful and compassionate. So I think the Pope's called us back to something absolutely essential. Am I charitable in what I'm going to say? We never run away from telling the truth. We cannot run away from telling the truth. But when we tell the truth, we have to tell the truth in charity. We have to tell the truth in love. Sometimes, though, when we go out to the world, it has to be admitted that some of our language does get in the road, that it can be easily misunderstood. And I like the story of the time the young priest was having trouble with his sermons. So he asked the local bishop for help. "Well," said the bishop, try to get the congregation's attention when you get straight into the pulpit. Start out, 'Last night I was in the warm embrace of a good woman.'" He said, "I always find that sparks the congregation's attention." And then go on to reveal how warm and accepting she was, and at the end reveal, "It was your mother." Beautiful for sermons about family love. The following Sunday, the young priest decided to take the bishop's advice immediately, but when he got into the pulpit, something got lost in translation. He started out, "Last night I was in the warm embrace of a hot woman." The congregation audibly gasped. He realized he'd forgotten the rest of the story, so he said then, "I don't remember who she was, but the bishop really recommended her." So we've got to get the words right. Words matter. But what matters much more importantly than what we say, is in fact what we do. We don't get condemned over what we say. Jesus said that you can summarize his entire message by loving God, loving your neighbor, and loving yourself. On this hang all the law and the prophets. Well, I don't think we're finished with those three yet. So what we've got to say is still alive and wonderful. It's what we do or don't do upon which we're going to be condemned. And in actual fact, our Catholic community goes out every day in your country and mine and practices what it preaches. The next couple of slides you're about to see took me something like 7 weeks to do for you for tonight, because I've done it in Australia and it took me a similar time there. We don't even tell one another the good we do every single day in the United States or Australia. As a result, we can be incredibly discouraged that we're not doing what we could or should, and we're not living up to the demands of the gospel. Here's the bottom line. Right at the moment in the United States, it's outstanding. No, here we go. There are 5,368 elementary and middle schools, 1,200 high schools in the United States, and 240 schools for the disabled. The church educates 1.9 million students in the United States as of, this is last year's figures. That saves the taxpayer in this country $22 billion. Imagine if that wasn't there. Imagine what a difference that'd make to the federal budget. 99% of Catholic high school students graduate, and 85.7% go to college. There are 150,709 full-time staff in Catholic schools. That's an extraordinary group of people to be employing, and 97.2% of them are lay people. 75% are female and 21.1% are male. I'm a bit sick of being told that there is no such thing as a woman leader in the church. You know, I think women in the Catholic Church should go on strike for a week just to remind the boys who's actually running this show. Oh, I'm serious. You know, sometimes we may not have ordained women, but we have lots of women leaders. We have an extraordinary number of women leaders in education, healthcare and welfare, and indeed in your own parish. Pastoral care, women are leading like there's no tomorrow. Then we'll go over to 3.10 million public school students receive religious education through the CCD program last year in the United States. There are 233 Catholic colleges and universities educating more than 802,000 students. 60% of all undergraduate students are at Catholic colleges are in fact Catholic. And the oldest Catholic university is Georgetown in 1789, run of course and owned by the Jesuits. And the newest is the Holy Spirit College in Atlanta, founded in 2010. There are 645 Catholic hospitals in the United States, and last year they cared for 88 million patients. Isn't that an extraordinary contribution to healthcare in this country? Many of them on Medicare or Medicaid because they can't afford health insurance. Catholic hospitals employ 521,000 full-time employees and 223,000 part-time workers. We have 1,389 aged care centres caring for 640,000 elderly US citizens right now. There's not a lot of glamour in aged care, but thank God we're there. Some of us are going to need it before we're finished. Thank God we are running very good, caring, loving pastoral facilities where people can be looked forward with the dignity that they richly deserve. There are 105 Catholic residential homes for children looking after 18,672 young people. Let's go to welfare. Catholic Charities. There's a network of 177 Catholic charities in the United States. 3,449 special centres for social services assisted 25.2 million people in welfare last year. Last year, they looked after 8.5 million unduplicated clients. That means they didn't come back for a second time, simply came once, so it's even higher when you think about returners, and at over 2,600 local sites across the country. Nearly 60,000 people received disaster relief from Catholic Charities, your international relief agency, and over 300,000 clients received counselling and mental health services in 2015, and more than 105,000 received addiction services. Catholic agencies provide temporary shelter services, operating or managing 238 shelters with a total of nearly 10,200 available beds, 1,380 food banks, serving nearly 6.6 million people who came last year to get food. 325,000 immigrants and 70,000 refugees were received by Catholic social services and Catholic healthcare last year, particularly along the Mexican border, where the Holy Father has been rather controversial today. There we go. Catholic Relief reached 85 million people in 101 countries, and it raised $651 million with only 8% spent on administration. Do you know that the third best charity in spending the least on your donations to Catholic charity, or to Catholic Relief, is Catholic Relief? Isn't that extraordinary? Now, St. Vincent de Paul, I don't know if you know about the St. Vincent de Paul or you're in it, but it's among the largest charitable volunteer agencies in the USA, with 160,000 people giving 11.6 million hours in 2015 and assisting 14 million people. I'm getting a little bit sick of people telling me, "Oh, Father, the Salvation Army, now they're the real Christians, aren't they? They're out there looking after the poor." Don't get me wrong, I love the Salvos. Thank God for the Salvos. Don't tell anybody the Vincent de Paul is 3 times bigger. Don't tell anybody that, because apparently we don't do anything. We don't do anything. So, why do I say all of that? Because that took me 7 weeks to compile that information. We don't even tell each other the good we do every day, so we can get bitterly disappointed and discouraged. We can also believe that when we go out on mission to the world that we're not already doing it. If our Catholic community stopped what it's doing in education, healthcare, welfare and pastoral care tomorrow, this country would come to a screaming halt, and so would mine. We do go out every day and we do good things. Now, if you think I was going to avoid the tough issues here, well, no, I'm not. Firstly, I'm not boasting. I am doing what Paul tells us to do in 1 Corinthians 1:31. I'm boasting in the Lord. Why are we doing all of this? Christ is a teacher. So we're in schools and universities and colleges. Christ is a healer. We're in healthcare. Christ raises up the poor. We've got to be in welfare and social advocacy. And Christ is the good shepherd. So we are in pastoral care. We're not doing these things to become important and powerful. We're doing them because that's what Christ requires of us. Not to do it would be a betrayal of the gospel. And in every country where the church has been long established and well-resourced, as in your country and mine, the contribution of the church every single day is enormous. That's not for a moment not to recognize every other Christian denomination, every other faith tradition as well. But given that I'm not in a Presbyterian parish tonight, I won't focus on the Presbyterians. I know Mr. Trump is a very devout Presbyterian, apparently. So, if you thought, though, that we're going to stay away from the tough issues of boasting in the Lord, then let me say this. Honestly, if there's one thing that gets us every single time, it has been the sexual abuse allegations, without question. You can tell people everything you've just read and seen and heard, and the very next thing they say is, well, what about the sexual abuse of children by clergy and its cover-up? I don't know what your experience is like. In the last 20 years, I can hardly think of a conversation about this stuff where I haven't had to have that as a follow-up conversation. And I have felt angry, ashamed, and full of grief at both the crimes themselves, the shocking fallout for victims and their families, and indeed the cover-up. Don't say today we won't have any homework. If you haven't seen Spotlight, I want you to go and see it. Not because it's easy watching. It is not. Who here has actually seen Spotlight? It's a very beautifully made film, actually, and it's not full of gimmicks. It's got a very tough story to tell about the sexual abuse allegations, or not allegations, proven cases in Boston for the Catholic Church and their cover-up, and how the Boston Globe indeed lifted the lid on that in a series of reports over 6 months and ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize. I had 2 responses when the lights came up at the end of this film. Firstly, I had what I think the Old Testament calls holy anger. I was so angry to think that people would do that to children and that clergy would do that to children and that bishops thought that you could cover up for the sake of the good name of the church. Well, look at the good name of the church now, Your Excellency. Look at it now. our moral credibility in some circles is completely gone. Completely gone. I understand why. And that led me to my second response to this film, and that was about grief, profound grief, that such a small group of clergy, over and against the vast majority who have never molested, never been accused, never been convicted, could in fact have us in the situation we're in right now. There's no running away. We are in the spotlight. And the days of Catholics saying it's all a media beat up from an anti-Catholic press are over. It is not that. Now, some people delight in it a little too much. I get that. We also can't say it's a few sick individuals. Those days have gone too. And we do know that there is sexual abuse, of course, in in many family homes, in religious groups, in all welfare and government institutions that have long-lasting dealings with children. We're not on our own by any means. But that shocking context doesn't afford us any comfort or any excuse. Because the bottom line is, there is absolutely no apology we can ever repair the damage. No amount of money or compensation can give somebody back their innocence and childhood, and no act of reparation or penance can ever adequately express the shame and the sorrow that many of us feel over what a very few clergy have done. That said, I want to make a couple of points about this, because it gets in the road of our mission every single time these days. All church officials against whom against credible allegations of child abuse have been upheld must be dismissed from the priesthood and the religious life. That doesn't mean that they won't be forgiven by God. More on it soon. Ooh. No one is beyond the mercy and forgiveness of God, but they can't continue to be leaders. This is where the commission the Pope has set up seems to be moving, and seems to be, at least in their interim report published in December last year, one of the early recommendations they were making to the Pope. It doesn't mean that they won't be forgiven by God, but when you are ordained or professed, you remain a leader in some way, at least publicly, at least in somebody's mind. There is a line in the sand for us. This is it. When they're convicted of this crime, we're not saying they're beyond the mercy and love of God. That's about being a Christian before one's God. We are saying you have forfeited any claim to leadership in our community. And a just settlement with survivors means the church is probably going to have to sell property in your country and in mine, because this has been a scourge in my own country, where we're going to have to come to claims with survivors, and because people matter more than buildings. Do you know, if to sell a huge block of land or a building means that there would be healing for a victim of sexual abuse by the clergy, I will put the for sale sign on it tomorrow. I'm not sure whether money actually does heal people, but the reason your country and mine goes for money as a compensatory tool is because we want people and institutions to bleed. It goes back to the old days where it was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. What's the way people bleed now? Financially. So we often want, for medical settlements and for other settlements, accident settlements, we want financial compensation. And I'm not sure whether it actually heals people, but if it does, then I'd put a for sale on any building we have. Why? Because a human being, a person who was once abused, matters to me more than any block of land, any building we own. And it is a way of saying to the community, we are very serious about repairing the damage as far as we possibly can. I'm more than conscious in talking about this, we sometimes have victims of child sexual abuse in the church tonight. That's all I want to say about that. So you can relax if already you're feeling a little anxious, because I'm more than conscious. But if I came here to talk about our mission to the world and we didn't talk about this, then we're not serious. And those days have gone. Does it break our heart? Yes. But it gets in the road of all our proclamation and living out of the gospel. Therefore, we have to get this right. Have to. The second element the Pope said about going out to the world was about enculturation, taking the culture seriously. We're commissioned, like the disciples, to bear witness to Christ's personal love in our workplace, with our friends, and of course in our family homes. Now, you guys have to face up to the US culture as it is and not as you'd prefer it to be. I have to face up to the Australian culture as it is and not as I prefer it to be. But we can't be on mission to a culture we don't know. What I'd like to go through with you now is, what does the average United States citizen look like? Who are we actually trying to talk to? But before I do, don't hear me in any way, shape or form criticising the United States of America. There's nothing worse, is there, than a visitor turning up in your country telling you everything that's going wrong. You feel like saying to someone like me, LAX is not very far away, thank you very much. All I'm about to give you are almost completely consistent with my own country. So I'm not holding you out to dry. I'm not putting you out there and saying, look at America. Everything I'm about to say, pretty well, with a few little tweaks and nuances here and there, actually applies to Australia as well. We're in this together. Here's the US culture you're sent out to by Christ, whether you like it or not. And the Pope says there's no avoiding it. The average United States citizen is just over 37 years of age. Who here is 37 or 38? Well, life hasn't been kind to at least one person here, but that's another story. 37.3. So we'd have no 37-year-olds. We lived together before we got married. 69% of all people who get married in the United States live together before they get married. I'm not canonizing any of this. I'm simply saying it's true. We got married at 26 and a half by a civil marriage celebrant. 59% of all marriages in the United States, it's 70% in Australia, are not done in churches, synagogues or temples anymore. They go to civil marriage celebrants. Sometimes, by the way, that's because they went to the priest the first time and he gave them a terribly hard time. This lovely young couple got a really difficult time from father because, well, you're going to have to stop living together, you're going to stop having sexual intercourse, you're going to have to move out and not meet again or not live together until the wedding, go to confession and then we might do your wedding. That couple walk out of that rectory straight into the arms of a marriage celebrant because it's now all too tough. We were trying to do the right thing and now it's a bit complex. I wonder what the message of mercy and compassion is to them. See, I think the Pope is unbelievably challenging for everyone, including me. When I find somebody whose lifestyle may not be in accordance with the church, I want to speak the truth, that's right. But I have to do it compassionately. I have to do it as mercifully as I possibly can. We most probably will not divorce. The divorce rate in the United States, I found out, was 33.4. From watching your film and television, I thought it was 99. Like everybody in films in the United States are getting divorced, it always seems. Well, that's the way it appears anyway. In Australia, it's about just the same. We're about 35.6. We're a bit higher than you. But once we go through the heartache and trauma of getting divorced once, we don't get better at staying married. We get better at getting divorced. For the United States, second marriages, they break up at the rate of 38.4. Third marriages go to 44.6. Fourth marriages go to 49.7. If you're getting married for the 5th time this Saturday, could you please see me straight after at the reception? We need to talk about that, and quickly. The way we have treated divorced and remarried people in the Catholic Church is a scandal. An absolute scandal. There are some here tonight who are divorced and remarried. And honestly, sometimes they were the wronged party in the first marriage. They were the wronged party. And they've had to live with that for the rest of their lives, even feeling somewhat pushed to the edge of our own Catholic community. And as you know, the Vatican is trying to deal with that right now. We have 1.8 children. I don't know what a 0.8 baby looks like. In Australia, we have a 0.51. We have 2.5. We have 1.8 children with increasingly unbaptized. Do you know who the biggest promoter of baptism is in the Catholic Church in your country and mine? The secretary of the local Catholic school. Because this lovely couple who've had their baby baptized, well, they haven't yet, they ring up and say, we want to get Johnny into St. Bede's school. And the secretary will say, well, look, that's fine. We'll need his birth certificate. We'll also need his baptismal certificate. And the lovely mother or father will say, look, we've got the birth certificate, but we haven't quite had him baptized yet. He's 3 or 3.5, but we haven't had him baptized yet. And so they come along to me. I'm baptizing 3.5-year-olds like it's going out of fashion. And you know, some Catholics say to me, oh, the only reason they're having that child baptised is to get him into the Catholic school. And the downside is? Like seriously, they say that as though this is a terrible thing to do. Last I checked, we thought baptism was a good idea. Is always a good idea. I also thought we thought Catholic schools were a good idea. So far this is a tick and a tick. Here's the bottom line about a sacrament, and don't tell some priests this. Priests don't own sacraments. Christ owns the sacraments. Christ baptizes. Christ hosts us all at the Eucharist. Christ ordains. Christ forgives in reconciliation and penance. Christ anoints. This isn't even trendy. This is as old as sacramental theology ever is. I'm the minister in Christ's name. And last I checked, he wasn't stingy with his presence. So if he wasn't, why would I be? I am as generous as I can. Here's my policy. I baptize anything that moves. I marry anything that moves. And I bury anything that doesn't. And I leave the rest up to amazing grace, because here's the bottom line about sacraments. It doesn't matter where you start. It matters where Christ is going to finish it. That 3.5-year-old's getting baptised to get into St. Bede's school. That's where he's starting. Wait and see where Christ is going to finish this. As a 92-year-old man with 9 children, 6 of them nuns and 3 of them priests. We live in one of the largest houses we've ever built. Isn't this interesting? It's true in Australia as well. We've never had smaller families. We've never built bigger houses. Isn't that amazing? Extraordinary. We don't need it. We have less than, now this is a bit different between us, less than $100,000 in savings and $75,000 in debt. That's the average for the United States, including the mortgage. You're overweight. And guess what? So are we. We won't have the scales at the back of the church, don't worry. We have trouble sleeping. We won't have a hands up about that one. And we live in one of the largest of the 50 cities in the United States. We're even worse than you. 86% of the 24 million Australians live on the coast. As you know, Australia is a very big country. If you put it into the United States, it goes from Los Angeles to Detroit, from Vancouver to Mexico City. You're wider, we're longer. And there's only 24 million of us. So we're hugging the coast in these cities like it's going out of fashion because it's desert mainly in the middle. But you like your cities as well. We lose $452 per adult a year gambling. Now, if I didn't lose that and you didn't lose that, a lot of people are making up for us. A lot. And the Catholics, by the way, we're hopeless on gambling because we keep gambling all the time. At least Irish Catholics do. It's unbelievable. We were having St. Patrick's Day race meetings and we were having bingo and hooey and, we were having raffles every time you turn around. This is where we need the Baptists. The Baptists are wonderful. They don't like gambling and they didn't do much of it to raise money. We gave $2,974 last year to religion and/or charities. I want to give you a great compliment. You are the most generous givers in the world. My country is $996. You give $2,000 more. You are a very generous country. You're also the wealthiest country. What did the Lord say in Luke 14? Those to whom much has been given, much will be required. So pat yourself on the back by all means. But when we say our blessing goes up for a Christian, our obligation to share goes up with it. That's a very strong message in the gospel. But you are to be absolutely admired, and many of us around the world admire you for it. What's the number one? I love this. What's the number one item, though, in an American home these days? It's a new kitchen. And we can actually show, we're ripping out kitchens like it's going out of fashion in homes now, and we can actually show that when the cooking shows all took off on television, people didn't look and say, oh my goodness, I must cook that souffle for the family tomorrow night. We didn't say that. We went, what range, what tops, what benches? Fisher & Pike or Miele stainless steel. Harry, we're getting a new kitchen, all right? We'll rip out the old kitchen, we'll put in the new kitchen, but the day we finish the new kitchen, that night to celebrate, we'll go out for dinner. And the next night we have takeout. Because you can't dirty the new kitchen. Isn't this interesting? Think about your parents and your grandparents. We have never spent as much money on a room in which we spend so little time. in comparison to our mothers and our grandmothers who spent next to no money on a room in which they spent an enormous amount of time. Isn't that interesting? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just fascinating. And we have someone in our home who's chronically depressed. Depression in your country and mine is a very, very serious issue. We've got people here tonight who are depressed or have had depression, living with it now, or you've got somebody at home or in your circle of friends who has depression. It's an insidious disease, depression. I've never had it, but I've lived with Jesuits in community who have had it. And I think people who live with depression and keep going are just bloody heroic. And I swore for a reason. They're just heroic. I've lived with Jesuits who got out of bed and did a big day's work, and they were in darkness all that day. There's a great social researcher called Hugh Mcauley who says the Western world has a social depression, and he says we know that by how we answer the question, how are you, in Australia or in the United States. Mcauley says that when we ask the question, how are you, he is almost certain that we tend to say one of two things. We tend to say we're frantic or we're exhausted. So you say to somebody, how are you? They say, I'm exhausted, I'm finished, I'm spent, I'm so tired, I'm absolutely had it. And that's the day we come back from holidays. Alternatively, so I'm frantic, roll up my feet, not enough hours in the day, I'm not know how I ever get everything done. So we're frantic and we're exhausted. How do we know this is true? When was the last time you said to a fellow American, how are you? And they said, I've got the life-work balance perfectly in order, thanks for asking. You never hear that, do you? You will now hear yourself with new ears. How do you answer the question, how are you? How are you? We're frantic or we're exhausting. We're not necessarily lying. I'm not saying that, nor is Hugh Mcauley. But there's a culture of exhaustion in your country and mine. There's a culture of frantic activity. That's not a healthy way to live. That is not a healthy way to live. That's what the contemplative life in Catholicism is all about. Bringing a bit of balance back, that in Lent especially we're asked to take some time to restore the imbalances of our life. We watch 3 hours and 11 minutes of television a day. That's not very hard to do. Come home at 6, turn off the television at 11 past 9, there's the daily average. But if you're born right now and get to your 70th birthday, you've spent 9 years in front of the television. 9 years of your whole life watching television. Now, people will say that's ridiculous. Babies don't do that. Yes, they do. Television is now the absolute #1 child-minding centre of your country and mine. Babies are in front of the television all the day and all the night. So television is sometimes on in homes all day and all night, particularly single occupancy for older people, because it breaks up the silence and is a little bit of company every night. Oh, that's a bit hard to read. But we read Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which was the script of the West End production. That was the #1 bought text last year in the United States by J.K. Rowling. Me Before You, The Glass Sword, the Red Queen series, #21, When Breath Becomes Air, and the adult colouring book. I don't know if you've caught up with this, and swear words, unfortunately, but all these colouring books have taken off for adults, not for kids, but for adults. And then finally, we go to church at Easter and Christmas and for hatching, matching, and dispatching. Now, that one matters. Our biggest moment of evangelisation in every parish is not running a program of evangelisation in the parish. Our biggest moment of evangelisation in every parish is every baptism, every wedding, and every funeral we do. Oh, I'm not making this up. When does the world come to us? When do unchurched people, atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, walk through that door? For a baptism, for a wedding, and for a funeral. They come into this beautiful room, they sit and try and enter in, and we have to welcome them. So, Pope Francis has been so big in this year of mercy on hospitality, firstly of God, and secondly of the church. Do you know, it breaks my heart when I go anywhere. Before I became a priest, I used to go to, obviously, other priests when they were saying Christmas Mass, and the whole place would be absolutely packed. And Father would come in and go, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and then say, well, the whole church is full tonight, but most of you aren't our parishioners, and you all come tonight, but I don't know if we're going to see you next Sunday. Well, you're not now, Father. Like, let me get this right. These wonderful people have come once a year. Okay, we'd love them to come back again. But if they have a good experience, they might just come back next week. If we turn up and yet again we're inhospitable and point out their failings and faults from the word go, no wonder they walk out that door and see whether they're even going to come back next year. Mind you, I have a friend of mine who only comes to the Christmas Mass, I say, in Sydney once a year, and I went up to him and I said, oh, you've come back for your annual visit. It's great to have you. You're very welcome. And he said, Father, I've got to tell you, I belong to the Catholic Secret Service. I can only afford to blow my cover once a year by coming to Mass. Every time we gather for a wedding, a baptism, or a funeral, we should be ridiculously hospitable, wonderfully welcoming. Why? Because God is welcoming to us, and Christ invites all. Christ hosts all. It costs me nothing, and it can do so much good. What do I say at the beginning of baptisms, weddings, and funerals? Long gone are the day, thank God, when anyone who is not a Catholic should feel anything but very welcome at this sacrament. Whether you're of another Christian denomination, another faith tradition, if you're a Jew, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, or a Sikh, or even if you don't share our belief in God, if you're an atheist or agnostic or a secular humanist, I warmly welcome you today, and I hope you'll all join in any part of the ceremony to which you feel able. At that point, seriously, I cannot tell you how much good that's just done for the sake of the proclamation of the gospel. Later, after everything else that's happened at the wedding reception, at the wake, or at the party that follows the baptism, I cannot tell you how many people will come up and say, I have never been welcomed as an atheist at any church ceremony ever before in my life. And I found myself singing the hymn and saying the Lord's Prayer. Thank you. Now we're talking. That's the moment. Let's have a quick stand-up break because you can't sit for longer than 45 minutes. Now, I can imagine some of you sitting there saying, I was expecting a very spiritual talk for a Lenten talk, and he had, so far all we've talked about are all these facts and figures about the Catholic Church and all this profiling of demography. There's nothing very spiritual about that, or you're wrong. If you think that, you're absolutely wrong. Because if we don't know the good we're doing, and if we don't know who we're going out to talk to, how are we going to proclaim the gospel to them? If we don't do a little bit of work about the world to which the Lord sends us, then we could be doing it in a vacuum. What's the third thing that the Holy Father says should mark our mission of mercy? It should to be liberate people, he said. Set them free so they might be the best sons and daughters of God they can possibly be. Now, when people don't feel very liberated, it comes out in all sorts of other aberrant ways. Let me tell you a story. When I started my work in communications in Melbourne for the Catholic Church, I was only a newly ordained priest, but I was asked by a wonderful Sister of Mercy to help out at a local parish school as the chaplain. This wonderful woman, her name was Sister Mary Tarcisius. Didn't the nuns have fantastic names? Sister Mary Tarcisius. And she was 83 years of age and worked in pastoral care in the school. And she used to do the Nativity play at Christmastime with the children and the Passion play at Easter time with the kids. Well, I was invited at the end of that year to be the guest of honour at the Year 3s, the 8-year-olds, doing the Nativity play. So there we were, all the kids in the school, about 350 children in our Catholic grade school, and we had all of the Year 3 parents were all in, all the staff were there, of course, and all the Year 3s had a role in the Nativity play. Everything went, when I got there on the day, Sister Mary Tarcisius said, look, I've had a little bit of trouble with the little boy who's going to be playing the innkeeper. He wanted to play St. Joseph, but he's actually a refugee child who's here on a wonderful scholarship. He's a beautiful boy, but he's a Muslim from Sierra Leone, and I really thought I should have a Christian boy playing St. Joseph, so I've made him the innkeeper. He's not very happy, but I think he'll be okay. Everything went along quite nicely until the moment where the innkeeper, pardon the pun, came in to his own. He went up to the little makeshift door on the stage of the school hall and knocked. And we could see the innkeeper. He went, "Who's there?" "I am Joseph, and this is my wife, Mary, and she's having a baby." Having a baby? She was having octuplets. It was the biggest tummy on a woman I'd ever seen in my life on that 8-year-old. "And we've got nowhere to stay, and we want to come into your inn." And he didn't budge. He looked so angry and defiant. Now, sitting in the front row was Sister Mary Tarcisius, me, and the principal of the school. I was the guest of honour. Sister leant forward and said, "Come on, Ahmed, darling, you know what to do. Open the door, nowhere to stay tonight, but we've got the manger at the back. Come on, love, you know what to do." Nope, he wasn't budging. So she said to Joseph, "Knock again." We get the speech for the second time. Now, you know better than I, some of you, that when 8-year-olds are fairly defiant, they tend to get this action going, right? Well, he was like the inside of a Maytag. It's going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Oh, he was he's not opening that door, no way. So the tension's rising in the room now. Sister Mary Tarcisius says, "Darling, I saw your mum and dad before, they're here, and they'll be so proud of you, love. Come on, open the door, nowhere to stay tonight, but we've got the manger at the back." Nope, he wasn't going to budge. So she said to Joseph, "Knock again." We get the speech for the third time now. Now, before Ahmed could decide what to do next, a voice came from the room. "Ahmed, you open that goddamn door, I belt your bottom." And I turned around to see the biggest human being I have ever seen in my life. Ahmed's father, Muhammad, was a refugee from Sierra Leone to Australia. He was 6'8.5". He weighed a couple of 100 pounds and not an ounce of fat on this human being. And he was, without question, the biggest tank of a human being I had ever seen in my life. Enormous man, huge shoulders. And he wore the celebratory white and gold kaftan that some Islamic African men wear with that wonderful round hat. He was also one of the blackest men I'd ever seen. He was an extraordinary looking human being. And now he's coming down the aisle. Boom, 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 boom. And every adult in the church room is going, "Open the door, open the door, open the goddamn door." Because your bottom belted by that bloke is going to hurt. Now, I can't actually say what he said, but somebody intercepted Muhammad, and so he didn't get to the stage, but Ahmed decided to take his father's advice immediately. He opened the door, looked at Mary, and said, "You can come in," and then yelled at Joseph, "But you can beep off." And with that, the shepherds, the angels, and the 3 wise men all attacked the innkeeper because he said a rude word. And now there was an almighty fight going on the stage. What did the beautiful children in our Catholic grade and elementary school do while watching this? They then went, "Fight, fight, 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 fight." It took about 20 minutes to restore peace on earth and goodwill to all men and women. I think it was, without question, the best nativity play I have ever seen in my life. I have never seen a better nativity play than that. Do you know why? Because God's okay with mess. See, some people don't like hearing any of this tonight because, it's all too messy. And they want it all very neat and simple and lovely. Oh, they haven't even heard Christmas yet. The first Christmas must have been unbelievably messy. Unbelievably messy. God is okay with mess. He enters into our mess. And what does this liberation look like, even in our mess? The first is obedience. The word obedience comes from the Latin word audare, meaning to listen. When I want the kids to obey me, when I want the students in a class to obey me, we obey the law of the land, it's all about listening. The word listen comes from the Latin word to listen. The word obey comes from the Latin word to listen. And it's about mutual listening. When you buy in on why people want you to do what you do and they've listened to your experience, you tend to be able to obey so much more easily. So I think we should be listening to the world and hopefully it will listen to us. The second element is joy. this is one of the big themes of this pontificate. If you're a happy Catholic, can you please tell your face about it sometime soon? Catholics are generally some of the gloomiest lot I've ever met. Now, I don't think that's actually as true in the United States as it is in Australia. Australia, England, Ireland, and New Zealand, we tend to be a lot more cynical than you. We tend to have a sharper humour than you. And one of the other things, of the many, many things I admire about your country, is you're very enthusiastic. You want to give it a go, and I think that's really been the spirit of this great country. Well, that's to be encouraged. In my parish, I'll say to the first half of the church, why don't we turn to each other at the beginning of Mass, because we didn't do it before, and welcome all of those people who may be new to our parish or we haven't seen before, and greet them all quite warmly. The first half of the church does this. The second half of the church look at me, cross their arms and go, you've got 45 minutes, I don't do this rubbish, get on with it. Tick, 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 come on, hurry up, I don't do any of this. And I've always wondered if a 20-year-old is sitting next to that person, and the following week they go to an evangelical church where they will be ridiculously well welcomed. I wonder which one they're going back to on week 3. See, Pope Francis is so strong. He says that if you don't have to have a supercilious smile on your face all the time. That's a pathology. It needs therapy. It's a joy that says, I know where I've come from, why I'm here, and where I'm going. That's what we say. I know where I've come from. I know why I'm here. I know where I'm going. Now, if that doesn't put a bit of a spring in your step, then it should. I can't tell you how many grandparents come up to me and say, Father, my children, my grandchildren aren't going to Mass. What am I going to do? And I'm going to say, I always say, well, firstly, stop telling them they're going to purgatory or hell for eternity. You've been doing that for 35 years and it hasn't been working, so let's not do that anymore. Secondly, why don't we try something really radical? Why don't you actually transparently joyful and wonderfully just and good in the way that you live? Because all I know is when I do your funeral at the wake, they will come up and say, I don't know what Nana and Pop had, Father, but their faith gave them an enormous amount of joy and life. That's the moment. You'll be in heaven to see it, but be as good as you can. That your faith could motivate you to be transparently joyful. The third one, and this is so absolutely caught up in Pope Francis in his leadership of our community, compassion for the poor. Pope Francis has helped the whole church to see that being a follower of Christ, we have undeniable obligations to the poor. Undeniable obligations. And our mission to be compassionate doesn't just demand that we abandon our principles or our beliefs, and also that we don't just give charity. It's more than that. Pope Francis says that mercy asks us to contemplate what it's like to be black in a white world, to be a refugee in a settled world, to be a victim of domestic violence when you've grown up in a peaceful home, to be gay in a straight world, to be divorced and remarried in a married world, and to be disabled in an abled world. Imagine what it's like on the other side. They're the challenges we get. And at that point, when we can ask the question, what must life be like for you? The Pope says we're touching on the divine. That's the compassion we're talking about. We're motivated because we've contemplated what it must be like for the other person on the other side. Gratitude. You know, gratitude is absolute. Oh, I've talked about that, so we'll keep going there. Gratitude. You know, the two most disappearing words in the English language right now are please and thank you. Let's not allow that to happen. Ask most teachers these days. Some parents don't insist on their children saying please and thank you. I'm a very old-fashioned Jesuit teacher, I can tell you. When I had a child in my class, he'd put his hand up in my Year 10 religious education class and say, "Can I go to the toilet?" There are so many problems I used to say with that sentence, I'm not sure where I'm going to start. Firstly, it's not can I go to the toilet, it's may I go to the toilet, because I assume your bladder is working, therefore you can go to the toilet, but you're asking for permission, so it's may I go to the toilet. Secondly, it's may I go to the toilet please. And thirdly, I'm a bit old-fashioned. I'd like my title used in there. May I go to the toilet, please, Father? And until you put it like that, then you can go to the toilet right where you're sitting, because I'm not giving you permission. Next minute, the hand goes up. May I go to the toilet, please, Father? Yes, of course you may go to the toilet immediately. I also was a tyrant about good and well. I would say to a boy, how are you, Jeremy? And he'd say, I'm good, thank you, Father. I'd say, no. Good's a moral category for others to judge. I'm interested in your health, and therefore the answer to that question is not good. It's always, I'm well, thank you. That's what you should say. Not I'm good, I'm well, thank you. Now I go to reunions of 35-year-old men I used to teach when they were 15, and they come up to me and say, I'm well, thank you, Father, and may I go to the toilet, please? And I say, thank God those parents got something for the $25,000 for their Jesuit education. At least they got something. They know the difference between can and may. They know the difference between well and good. And they say please and thank you. If you've stopped saying grace before meals, bring it back immediately. Grace is not about a nice social courtesy. It's actually about changing the world. I go to people's homes for dinner, and I'm very honoured to be invited to people's homes for dinner. And we're called to the table, and the 3 kids come along, the teenagers. I love them. They're great truth tellers, teenagers. And when they get there, Dad will say, Father's going to say grace. Stop eating, kids. Stop. Father's going to say grace first. Lovely to have you tonight, Father. Thank you. I love a 16-year-old. The 16-year-old pipes up and says, why are we saying grace, Dad? We never say grace. Why are you saying grace? Because the priest's here. And I say, because 36,000 people will be dead today from starvation. 16,000 of them are 16 or under, you smug thing. I don't say that, but I really want to. You see, grace before meals is not a social nicety. It's reminding us 3 times a day that we're eating and people are starving in a world where we could feed everyone. Forgiveness. This is absolutely at the cornerstone, of course, of the Year of Mercy. Don't tell some Catholics this, but Jesus had next to nothing to say about sex in the Gospels. That doesn't mean it's unimportant. It just means that the Lord himself had next to nothing to say about it. Now, maybe he knew that the Catholic Church wasn't going to shut up about it for the next 2,000 years, so he didn't have to worry about it. But here are the facts. The 2 biggest sins from the Lord's lips are hypocrisy and those who won't forgive. If we're actually looking at what the Lord preached against as the biggest sins, there is not a page of the Gospel where the Lord does not confront hypocrisy and those who will not forgive. Could it be said of us who follow Christ that we are famous for our forgiveness? And then finally, of course, it's all about love. Love of God, love of neighbour, and love of self. I wanted to say just in forgiveness, sometimes we've got to start with forgiving ourselves, by the way. There are people in this church right now for whom Lent could be the journey for you to forgive yourself. Give yourself an even break, because the Lord does. He does. So to finish and to inspire you to go out on this joyful and merciful mission, I want to tell you about a person who has inspired me to live out a courageous faith that is merciful and joyful. I'll come back to that one. Soon to be declared a saint, Catherine Mcauley lived in Dublin from 1778 to 1884, and she was the foundress of the aptly named Sisters of Mercy. They taught me grade school, and some of them remain some of my friends to this day. But I have a great admiration for their foundress, not just because they taught them, but that because my mother was a Sister of Mercy for 23 months. That's her, that's my mum. And a happy snap of Sister Mary Teresia on her reception day on the 22nd of January 1955. She was a freshly minted bride of Christ. She just had all her hair cut off, and now she was bedecked in all the regalia that nuns used to wear. By 1957, she'd run away from the convent, and thank God she did, or I wouldn't be standing here right now, at least in the form I am. But nonetheless, it was Mum knew that the convent wasn't for her after all, and indeed later was to be married and have 3 children. Now, like Catherine Mcauley did a few things that raised Catholic eyebrows. By the time she was 20, she was an orphan, and her uncle and aunt took her in. And by 44, when she'd cared for those two wonderful people until the day they died, they were both Protestants, by the way. She was a Catholic, they were Protestant. She, at 44, inherited their entire estate. In 1822, she was worth £3 million. That is a fortune by today's money. I haven't got a clue what it is, but £3 million at the beginning of the 19th century is an enormous amount of money. She was now an heiress. What did she do with the money? She founded the Sisters of Mercy on the Feast of Our Lady of Mercy, the 24th of September, 1827, and in Baguette Street. That's her there. That's at least a portrait of her. And she founded this place in Dublin, which is the House of Mercy on Baguette Street in Dublin. When she died in 1841, aged 63, there were mercy convents and 100 women had already joined her. And within 14 years, there were 3,000 Sisters of Mercy working in many, many countries throughout the world. Today, there are 9,000 Sisters of Mercy working for the poor and needy in education, healthcare, welfare, advocacy for women, for refugees, and spirituality and pastoral care. Now, why do I tell you any of that? Because when my mother, the former Sister Mary Theresia, came to London where I was studying in 1996, we were then going next to Ireland together. And the only place that Mum said she wanted to go to was the International Mercy Centre at Baguette Street in Dublin. Mum had been told by another Sister of Mercy that she could see her own name in the Mercy book, wherein was recorded the names of every single woman who had ever entered the Sisters of Mercy anywhere in the world. Mum thought this would be a great kick to get to Dublin and see Helen Joan Davis, Sister Mary Theresia, entered this day and ran away the next day. Our visit to Ireland, by the way, didn't go very well. Within an hour of Mum arriving in Dublin, she fell and broke her ankle. Pressing on, now in a cast, 2 days later, we arrived at that door and at Baguette Street. And Mary Goggins, a great Irish friend of ours, led the way. A lifelong friend of mine from home, Christopher Perkins, was also visiting Dublin for a conference in journalism at the time. He's an excellent communicator and wonderful former journalist, but Christopher has an inquiring mind about everything, religious faith in general, and saints in particular. Having asked ahead, we knew that the last tour of the Mercy Centre left the front door at 2 o'clock. But finding an accessible car park in Dublin was not easy. Mum was negotiating her way to the door on crutches, and by the time we got to the foyer, it was 2:05 p.m. The tour had already left. Now, Mary must have known that we might have needed a little bit of help to get through the next chapter, because she told me I had to wear my clerical collar to the Mercy Centre in Dublin. And the sister on reception would not let us go and join the tour, even though we were only 5 minutes late. Well, Mary swung into action, one Irish woman to another. "Sister, Father Leonard's mother was not in the country 5 minutes when she fell and broke her leg, and she's come all the way from Australia to see Mother Catherine's tomb and to see all about her here. It would break her heart not to do so." It was a bit of an overstatement, but it worked. Sister looked at Mum's cast and my collar and relented. She said we could now go and join the tour, catch the lift to the top, and go all the way to the end. They go to Mother Catherine's rooms first. When we arrived in the room, we were told by the nun who was the tour leader, we were very, very welcome. Our tour leader was an Irish sister who gave a vivid pen picture of Mother Catherine Mcauley and the significance of the room where we were now in. She said, "And if you look over here now, you're standing in the very room where Mother Catherine decided to found the Sisters of Mercy. And here is the very desk at which she wrote the constitutions. And this is the bed upon which she died. And this is the prie-dieu, the kneeler, on which she said her prayers." And our touring party, of course, were humbled to be in such a sacred place. Some were moved to tears. When Sister had finished her moving commentary, my mother, from the back of the group, noticed the famous portrait of Mother Mcauley up on the wall. A replica of that painting is in almost every convent all over the Mercy world. And my mother said, well, as a girl, I certainly did time under that painting. When I was in trouble with the nuns who taught me all the way through my schooling, I was told to go and stand under Mother Catherine's painting and pray to her to help me be a better girl. The tour now started to fall apart. Well, said the sister who was taking our tour guide, that's actually not Mother Catherine. No, she was much too humble to sit for a portrait while she was alive. So after she died, the sisters said to Mother Bridget, you look an awful lot like Mother Catherine. So why don't you sit for the portrait? And that's what happened. Moved by the foundress's humility, Christopher reassured the silent group, well, at least that's the very desk at which Mother Catherine used. Well, it may not be the very desk, said the sister, because there was a terrible fire here in 1884 and everything was destroyed and we lost a lot too. Now, Christopher, for the journalist, could now smell a story. Well, he knew he was onto something now. So he said, if there was a fire, then we're not really in the actual room, are we? Well, we're not actually in the actual room, but we're very close to it, you know. Oh, we're very close to it. And he said, and that's not actually the actual bed. Oh, no, well, it's not the actual bed. And that's not the very actual portrait, is it? A prie-dieu, is it? She said, oh, no, that all went up in the fire. Well, in general, she said, you might be right. But the place was rebuilt, you see, and we're very close to where everything of the actual room and actual things actually were. So Sister Christopher went on, we're not in the very room. That's not the actual desk. This is not the very bed. And that's not a portrait of Mother Mcauley. Well, yes, technically you're right, because Mother was so humble and Mother Bridget looked just like her. And with that, she led the tour out of the room. Mary, the only Irish woman within our group, then produced a £5 note, as it was in Ireland in those days. That was the £5 Irish note, which had Mother Catherine's portrait on it. And she said, can anybody tell me who in God's name is this? And we all yelled back, it's Mother Bridget, for goodness sake. And as we staggered into the corridor, Mary and my mother collapsed on a pew which was next to the wall in spasms of laughter. Chris and I caught up with the group, not wanting to miss a minute of this wonderful tour and the next very entertaining instalment that had coming our way. And as we arrived, Sister says, Father, is your mother going to join us? And with that, the whole group looked back to see Mary and my mother doubled over on that pew at the end of the corridor like this. Now, because from a distance, laughing and crying looked very similar emotions. They were just chugging away. They were absolutely hysterical with laughter. That Sister said, oh, look, it happens often enough. Mother Catherine's room has that effect on a lot of pilgrims. We'll leave them be. And with that, we left them alone. And then Sister said, and now I'd like you all to turn to your right and have a look out the window to Mother Catherine's mausoleum, to which Christopher piped up and said, are you sure? And she said, oh, no, the fire didn't get out there. No, that is actually where she's buried. Oh, yeah. Now, my mother and Mary recovered from their attack of profound spiritual consolation enough that we were reunited them down in the famous Mercy Room, wherein these famous Mercy books were held. We found the Brisbane Congregation of Sisters of Mercy and eagerly searched for the entry, Helen Joan Davis, Sister Mary Teresia in 1955. We looked and looked and looked a third time. The entries for Australia stopped in 1954. Sister explained, well, Australia mustn't have sent us the records beyond 54 because we've recorded and updated everything that they've sent us. It was then that Mum remembered that the Mercy nun who told her about these books had entered the year before her, and so she was there, but Mum was not. We just burst out laughing all over again. Then Chris and I went off to watch a documentary about how Mercy went all over the world, a beautifully produced Irish documentary which told the story of young women in the 19th century who left their parents, families and homes never to return, ever to go home ever again, some of them as young as 15, and embarked on a boat to serve the poor in 10 countries between 1839 and 1897. Australia and the United States included. As the lights came up from this magnificent documentary, My hardened agnostic journalist next to me turned to me with tears going down his face and said, "My God, they were brave, weren't they?" And indeed they were. Pope Francis has proclaimed Catherine Mcauley as one of our patrons of the Year of Mercy because she had an obedience that listens to needs first and tries to respond to them practically. She had a joy. She loved a party. It was recorded in lots of places and people who wrote about her that comes from faith and service. She had a compassion for the poor that seeks not only to alleviate the suffering, but to look at the root causes and do something about it so the poor may not stay that way. She was immensely grateful. She got £2 million and spent the lot on the poor in her lifetime. She was forgiving. She needed to be. Boy, did she have a tough time with some Irish bishops. There in Purgatory, she's on her way to heaven. I don't know that they're in Purgatory. I'm sure they're in heaven as well, please God. And finally, she was loving. Love of God, love of neighbour, and love of self. That's why I think Catherine is a stunning person for us to think about in our mission of joy and mercy in the Holy Year of Mercy during Lent. The final thing then I want to do is to do what priests do best, and rather appropriately given that story and one of the patrons, to bless you for the mission now at hand to the real world to whom Christ sends us. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be ever at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. And for courage for this mission, may we be blessed. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Thanks very much.